What if America's first foreign war wasn't declared by Congress, wasn't fought on land, and almost tore the young republic apart from the inside? In 1798, barely a decade after the Constitution took effect, the United States found itself locked in a shadow conflict with its former revolutionary ally, France. There was no formal declaration of war, no dramatic speech announcing hostilities. And yet, across the Atlantic and throughout the Caribbean, American and French warships hunted each other in deadly naval duels. The struggle would come to be known as the Quasi-War, an undeclared conflict that tested America's diplomacy, divided its politics, and gave birth to the modern U.S. Navy. To understand how this unlikely war began, you have to rewind to the aftermath of the American Revolution. France had been America's indispensable ally during the war against Britain. French money, ships, and soldiers helped secure victory at Yorktown. Many Americans felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the French monarchy and, later, toward the French Revolution that erupted in 1789. But by the 1790s, Europe was engulfed in chaos. Revolutionary France had executed King Louis XVI and declared war on much of the continent, including Great Britain. The Atlantic world was on fire. The United States, fragile and financially unstable, desperately needed neutrality. President George Washington had warned against entangling alliances, and in 1793 he issued a proclamation of neutrality, hoping to keep America out of Europe's wars. Neutrality, however, did not mean safety. Britain and France both began interfering with American trade. British ships seized American vessels trading with French colonies. France, in turn, grew suspicious that the United States was drifting toward Britain. Those suspicions intensified in 1794 when the United States signed the Jay Treaty with Great Britain, resolving lingering disputes from the Revolutionary War and reopening trade channels. To many French leaders, the Jay Treaty looked like betrayal. They believed America was siding with their enemy. In retaliation, French privateers, privately armed ships authorized by the French government, began capturing American merchant vessels in large numbers. Hundreds of American ships were seized, and their cargoes confiscated. American sailors were imprisoned in distant ports. The young republic was outraged. Newspapers published lists of captured ships. Merchants demanded protection. Farmers worried about lost markets. The issue was no longer abstract diplomacy, it was economic survival. In 1797, the crisis deepened dramatically with what would become known as the XYZ affair. President John Adams, who had succeeded Washington, sent American diplomats to France to negotiate an end to the seizures. Instead of formal negotiations, they encountered intermediaries, later referred to in official documents as X, Y, and Z, who demanded bribes and loans as a condition for even beginning talks. The demand shocked the American envoys. When news reached the United States, it ignited fury. The idea that a foreign power would demand payment just to negotiate with the United States struck at national pride. Across the country, citizens rallied behind the slogan, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute." Suddenly, public opinion shifted sharply against France. Even many Americans who had sympathized with the French Revolution felt humiliated. Calls for war grew louder. Yet President Adams faced a dilemma. The United States was militarily weak. The army was small and underfunded. The Navy was barely in its infancy. An all-out war with France, one of Europe's major powers, could devastate the Republic. Instead of a declaration of war, Congress authorized defensive measures. In 1798, lawmakers voided the treaties with France, approved the expansion of the Navy, and authorized American warships to capture French vessels threatening U.S. commerce. Though never officially declared, hostilities had begun. Thus started the Quasi-War. The conflict was primarily naval and largely fought in the Caribbean. American frigates, newly built and heavily armed, began escorting merchant convoys and hunting French privateers. Among the most famous ships was the USS Constellation, one of the first 6 frigates authorized by Congress in 1794. These vessels were designed to be fast and powerful, capable of outrunning larger ships and overpowering smaller ones. In February 1799, USS Constellation engaged the French frigate L'Insurgent in one of the war's most celebrated battles. After a fierce exchange of cannon fire in heavy seas, the American ship forced the French vessel to surrender. It was a stunning victory for the young Navy and a morale boost for the nation. Naval warfare at the time was brutal and intimate. Ships maneuvered for position, unleashed broadsides of iron cannonballs, and splintered wooden hulls with devastating effect. Smoke from gunpowder thickened the air. Sailors scrambled across blood-slicked decks to reload cannons. Every battle was a test of discipline, training, and nerve. Over the course of the Quasi-War, American forces captured dozens of French privateers and warships. Convoy systems reduced merchant losses. Gradually, the balance shifted in America's favor. But the conflict was not only fought at sea. It also raged in the halls of government and in newspaper columns across the United States. The crisis intensified partisan divisions between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Federalists, led by figures like Alexander Hamilton, favored a strong central government and closer ties to Britain. They used the French threat to justify expanding the military and consolidating federal authority. Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, feared that the Federalists were exploiting the crisis to suppress dissent and move toward authoritarian rule. Those fears seemed justified when Congress passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. These laws increased the residency requirement for citizenship, allowed the president to deport foreign nationals deemed dangerous, and criminalized false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government. Supporters argued that the acts were necessary to prevent French agents from undermining the nation. Critics saw them as a direct attack on free speech and political opposition. The Quasi-War, therefore, was not just a naval conflict. It was a constitutional test. It forced Americans to confront difficult questions. How much power should the federal government wield during a crisis? How far should civil liberties bend in the name of national security? Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, naval engagements continued. American ships such as USS United States and USS Constitution joined the effort, escorting convoys and chasing French raiders through warm, treacherous waters. The Caribbean theater was strategically vital, as it connected European markets with colonial wealth. Despite its limited scope, the Quasi-War had global implications. It signaled that the United States would defend its maritime rights. It demonstrated that the Republic was not a passive bystander in international affairs. And it established the principle that American commerce would be protected by American arms. By 1800, both nations were weary of the conflict. France, under the rising leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte, faced mounting challenges in Europe and the Caribbean, including a slave revolt in Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti. The United States, meanwhile, wanted stability and economic recovery. Diplomatic negotiations resumed, this time without bribery demands. The result was the Convention of 1800, which ended hostilities and restored peaceful relations. The agreement dissolved the 1778 alliance between the United States and France, freeing America from automatic obligations in European wars. The Quasi-War ended not with a dramatic treaty ceremony or triumphant parade, but with a pragmatic diplomatic settlement. Yet its legacy endured. First, it firmly established the United States Navy as a permanent institution. The success of American frigates proved the value of a professional naval force. Congress continued to fund and maintain the fleet, laying the foundation for future maritime power. Second, it clarified America's foreign policy trajectory. The young republic would pursue independence from European power struggles, resisting pressure from both Britain and France. Third, it reshaped domestic politics. The controversy surrounding the Alien and Sedition Acts fueled opposition that would contribute to Thomas Jefferson's victory in the election of 1800, a peaceful transfer of power that itself became a milestone in democratic governance. In retrospect, the Quasi-War seems modest compared to later conflicts. No massive armies clashed on continental battlefields. Casualty numbers were relatively small, and yet, its significance far outweighs its scale. It was America's first sustained military engagement beyond its borders. It tested whether the Constitution could endure under pressure. It revealed the fragility of alliances and the complexity of neutrality. And it proved that the United States, though young and uncertain, could defend its sovereignty on the world stage. The Atlantic waters where American and French ships once exchanged cannon fire are calm today. But in those tense years between 1798 and 1800, the fate of a fledgling republic hung in the balance, not through grand declarations, but through quiet resolve, strategic restraint, and the thunder of naval guns echoing across the sea.